Everybody. It is Friday, which means it's another Ask Me Anything webinar here with Experienced Investigators. I'm Jeannie Walters. I'm always thrilled to see you join us. Today, we're going to be talking about at-risk customers. Now, this is something we've talked about before, but now we're looking ahead. You know what, folks? We're not out of the uncertainty. So how do we navigate this with those customers who were already at risk? That's what we'll be talking about today. But really, I'm here for you. So please ask those questions, drop those into the comments. We will make sure that we address anything that you throw our way today. This is live, this is informal, this is about you. So please let us know what we can do for you. In the meantime, as you join us, please let us know where you're joining us from. What's the weather like there? Weather is crazy these days. I'm in Chicago. It's hot and humid as it has been the last few days, and it's hazy, which I think has to do with some smoke floating over us. But anyway, as always, we have David Hornreich, our Director of Marketing, here with us today. David, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Speaking of uncertainty, my Wi-Fi is a little uncertain today.
Oh,
One of the fun subplots of today's live session will be how will David's internet perform?
yeah.
But
Well,
so
that's
far,
always
so
fun.
good. I hope I'm coming in clear for everybody, and we're
You
doing well.
are. You
Great.
are. And so, how is it in Seattle today?
Also a little hazy. We've got smoke coming down from some fires in BC. So we've got
Mm,
kind of that nice, it was a beautiful sunrise this morning. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, it's the way of the world right now. I think we're all experiencing some interesting weather. So,
Absolutely.
well, good. Well, why don't we jump in? And as people have questions, of course, we'll address all of those at the end. But as people come in, please let us know where you're from, what you're experiencing as far as the weather and everything else, and any question that you want to address today. We left a lot of time for that. So please feel free to ask questions about customer experience in general or anything else. Maybe the weather in Seattle. Who knows?
Yeah. And I just want to, before we kick off, say hi to Thais joining us again. Always good to see you. And Joanne joining us from the greater Chicagoland area,
Oh,
which you're
my
familiar with.
neighbor.
Yeah,
Yeah, excellent. Well,
absolutely.
great to see you both. We're
Yeah.
always happy when we see our regulars and our newcomers every week. It's always a thrill. So thanks for being here. All right, well, let's talk about your at-risk customers. When we talk about this subject, a lot of times people will ask me, well, we don't really pay attention to those. We pay attention to the people who are joining as customers, and we pay attention to those people who maybe walked out the door already. Today, I want you to focus that lens on who are those customers who are about to walk out the door that you might not even know about, and what can we as customer experience leaders do about it? First of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeannie Walters. I am the CEO and founder of Experience Investigators, where we help leaders like you, enlighten leaders, create change and meaningful customer experiences that drive business results. We are all in business. We have to make sure that we are successful in those outcomes that we're looking for. Customer experience and being proactive about the customer experience that you deliver to your customers can help you do this. We help leaders through coaching, through consulting, as well as lots of workshops, training, keynotes at different events, things like that. So if we can help you, of course, let us know. If you need ideas, let us know that too. You can find us on social and everything else. We also have a special program going on. It's been going on since CX Day 2020, and it will wrap up on CX Day 2021 in October. So if you haven't already signed up for Year of CX, please do so to get all of your different tools and downloadables and everything that we've been sharing throughout this year. We have some more coming up, and all of the people who are signed up, they get those automatically. So sign up for Year of CX if you haven't already. So let's jump into this. And this is a topic that I don't have a lot of slides for. This is really a discussion because when we think about our at-risk customers, we often think about the people who are really obvious, frankly. When we are tracking things like Net Promoter Score, we might say, okay, anybody with a Net Promoter Score of 3 or under, or 4 or under, depending on your industry, they're at risk. Well, we might say things like that and only focus on that group. But first of all, you have to remember that many, many customers never fill out your survey. They never give you that feedback. They're quiet. They're just doing their thing. And they're quietly contemplating, is this providing value for me? And anytime they answer that question with, I don't know, then that means that they are going to be in a situation where they're going to be evaluating, okay, what are some of these things that could provide value? And when they start thinking that way, they start looking at your competitors, they start looking throughout the marketplace for somebody who can provide that value. So, at risk customers are a group that we just don't talk about enough. In fact, I worked with a client where we talked about this because that's the group we kind of focused on during journey mapping. It was so enlightening to the leaders of that organization because they literally said they had never thought about that group before. This happens in so many organizations. So, as a CX leader, I encourage you to think about who are those people and what is that point where they start evaluating, am I getting enough value as a customer? We often treat new customers incredibly well. We send welcome kits and we call them and we make sure they have everything they need. And then a year, 2 years later, maybe we don't. Maybe we're only sending invoices. Those are the types of things we need to think about to make sure we're being proactive in the customer journey and delivering that value as we go. Some programs that, or some brands that actually are really good at this, of course, there's Disney. People talk about Disney, but that's because they're constantly looking at how can we increase the value. So a few years ago, they started the wait time apps, so you could figure out how long is the line. They are developing technology like those wristbands that you can get that unlock your hotel room as well as get you on the rides and everything else. They're constantly thinking proactively about that. Some sports stadiums are starting to think about part of the journey that maybe we haven't really considered before, something that's been neglected. And that's, how long does it take if you are a fan and you are at a game and you are into that game and you are rooting for your team? How long does it take to go to the restroom? Because what they found was that if it took too long, people started evaluating, how much did that cost me? If you think about how expensive tickets have gotten, Super Bowl tickets here in the United States could go upwards of $5,000. So if you take a third of the time to stand in line and go to the bathroom before you get back to your seat, you might start evaluating, how much did that actually cost me? So they start thinking about those moments along the journey and how can we proactively provide something so that people are not backing up and evaluating the value of their experience in that way. Those are the types of moments when you're doing journey mapping, when you're looking at service blueprinting, when you're just finding out what's going on with people. How can we provide you value? Make sure you're looking for those moments that maybe they're not talking about in dramatic terms. They're not necessarily saying, this will force me out the door. It's one of those things that erodes trust, that just chips away at the relationship to the point where then they start really thinking, you know what, I'm not getting enough. I'm going to go out the door. They're not going to tell you anything about that. They're just going to walk out. So as we think about these things, I want you to think about, how can you find these folks in your organization? How can you make sure that you're looking for these at-risk customers? And when you think about that, I encourage you to reach out and discuss these things with your frontline leaders, with people who are interacting with your customers every day, your customer service group, your customer success team, your cashiers at your stores, anywhere that you can interact with people who are literally talking to customers every day. I feel like we need to turn up the volume on that right now, because right now there is so much uncertainty. Restrictions are changing, rules are changing, customers have higher level emotions right now around anxiety and frustration. And so things are changing so quickly that people are more at risk than we probably think they are. And when we talk about what's changing today, I also encourage you to really think about those employees who are serving those customers, because they could be at risk as well. We want to make sure that we're thinking through and addressing the needs of both the customers and the employees who are really serving and making sure that they get that positive customer experience. So, as you talk to different groups, as you make sure that you have those lines of communications with different leaders throughout your organization, what you're doing is you're previewing the data that will come up later. And what I mean by that is if we can prevent customers from walking out that door, if we can start identifying, you know what, we noticed that this group of customers is calling in for a lot more support lately. What does that tell us? That tells us that we need to be more proactive somewhere in the journey instead of just addressing that issue. Sometimes I compare customer experience to what can happen in healthcare. If you go to the doctor and you say, "This is my symptom," they might treat your symptom, but never figure out what caused that. If you go to a really good doctor, what they'll start saying is, "Okay, you've got this symptom. Let's figure out why. Let's go back and look at that root cause so that we can address that and prevent this from happening instead of just addressing the symptom." So that's how we kind of have to think about these at risk customers. Instead of thinking that it's this one thing, I want you to go back in the journey and think about what are all the ways that maybe they felt neglected or overlooked or started evaluating that value against their experience with your brand. So these are all the things that we need to consider as we're looking at our at risk customers. But today, we are dealing with all sorts of uncertainty around supply chain disruptions, around the pandemic, around travel, and overall staff shortages. We have all of these challenges right now, and that's why it's so important not to wait for what the data tells you when you know what's happening. Sometimes we sit around and we wait for that report. And I have been in those meetings where we pass around the report and everybody says, "Oh, this is going to be a bad one. Oh my goodness, we don't even want to look at this." And actually, humans have a capacity to avoid bad news, which is why some people, they won't get on a scale. They won't look at a report card because it's easier if we just don't look at it. We want to avoid that situation. And so when we're talking about these reports and this data that's hard to look at, a lot of times we know that. We know why. And if we can be more proactive today about these at risk customers, about really understanding them, making sure we understand not just where they are in the journey, but where they are in their emotional state. We are all dealing with higher levels of anxiety and frustration right now. And so helping people through that, helping your employees understand that can help avoid a lot of those situations that would lead a customer to walking out the door. So I know this is a lot and we're just kind of talking about it on this high level because I think it's so important for everybody to just think about right now. Customer experience leaders have a lot of pressure on them to really consider who are their customers, what can we do for them, and how can we just help them through this time of uncertainty. So at this point, I would love to get your questions. I would love to talk about whatever challenges you're facing right now. We are in this together and this is a tough time. And so let's acknowledge that. Let's support one another. And I will do my very best to answer whatever question you throw at me. I might not have the best answer, but I will give you anything that I have as far as knowledge or tools that might help you. So at this point, how are the questions coming in? What are people telling us, David?
Well, yeah, we've got a couple great comments. Thais says, exactly, app stores are there to for them to serve themselves with new products and services. I missed a little bit of your presentation, Jeannie, moving my computer into a room that had better Wi-Fi. So I'm not 100% up to date on the context for that comment, but thank you, Thais. Another great comment here. Brava, Jeannie Walters. Thank you for addressing the requirement to be proactive. Basic and assumed gesture, even more significant now.
Mhm. Very true. Very true.
Let's jump to a question that came in from the community earlier. And this is a simple one, but I don't think that the answer is simple. How do we convince other people in our organization that customers are at risk?
Oh, I love this question because I see this all the time. And this kind of relates back to the fact that we don't always want to look at what we don't like to look at. It's a lot easier and it feels better to talk about those customers who are loyal, who love us, And a lot of times when I get called into an organization, they literally start with that narrative. They say, "Oh, you don't understand. Our customers love us." And yes, there is a group of customers who love your brand, and we want to nurture them and we want to pay attention to them. But guess what? There are bigger groups who are probably thinking, nah, I like them. They're fine. But they can be wooed away a lot easier because they just don't feel like they're getting that value. Or maybe they felt like they were getting the value and now it's just not changing. There's nothing innovative or proactive about the experience to really keep them moving through the journey with you. Then there's the group that is almost out the door. They literally have one foot out the door. They're just trying to find a better option. I've talked about this in banking a lot. I think that there are opportunities in banking because people will basically stick with it until it's too painful instead of really looking around and thinking, what can we do to provide value and service and support and everything else? We are often put in the situation as customers where it's like anything else. Humans will do things until it's too painful. And so if we're not looking for those pain points, if we're not looking for ways to increase the number of positive micro moments, I've talked about this a lot too. If we can make sure that we are proactively putting that into the journey, then we're really going to make sure we can overcome those negative things. Getting back to this question, which I realized I totally went on a detour here. How can we get others in the organization to care about this? This is where it helps to know what your business goals are and what your outcomes should be. And then you start playing with numbers and you start saying, okay, what if we could keep 1% more of our customers per year? What if we could retain 1% more? What would that look like revenue wise? What if we could earn better word of mouth through a bigger group of people? So instead of just that high level group, what if we could expand that group just a little bit? What would that look like? How many referrals could we get? How much money are those referrals worth? This is where we really have to start thinking, what does each leader care about? Your chief marketing officer might really care about acquisition. So, what would those referrals do? How important would that be for them? If we can talk about the fact that, you know what, we're not interested in just saving the people who are great, who are very loyal. We are interested in saving all of our customers. We are interested in making sure that we're serving them and hearing them and closing the loop with them. That can really help other leaders understand how important this is. Now, if they're still saying, we don't have any at risk customers, I would ask them, how do we know? How are we measuring this? If we're using those CX metrics, it's really easy to talk ourselves into, you know what, this is fine. This is pretty good. If you are using NPS or CSAT and you might compare it within your industry and think, it's pretty good. It's what everybody else is getting. That's not a great answer. You want to make sure that you are looking beyond just what your competitors are doing and looking at, okay, what would it look like if we had higher NPS scores? What would it look like if we could get people to think that this is amazing? Those brands that I talked about before, Disney is one of them. Some of the things that are coming out with some of these sports arenas. Now, when you think about a sports arena, for many, many years, the product was simply what was going on the field, the actual game. Now you look at what's happened with customer experience there, and it's incredible. They've added ways that fans can interact. They've added things that provide a more comfortable experience at the arena. All of those different things. That's all experience driven. That's how we have to think, because otherwise, after a while, if your team isn't winning, it's really easy to think, well, I'll just come back when they are. And that's the lens we have to use when we're talking about these at-risk customers. So think about those things. Think about what Salesforce is a great example. They're coming out with some really innovative ideas around business content. Now, that's not their core product, but they're starting to every year they're starting to think about, what can we provide that offers more value to help our customers succeed at their goals. And so when you start thinking like that, you start seeing all of these opportunities to provide more positive experiences throughout the journey. But then you can also articulate that back to, what would the loss cost us? What would the gains win us within your organization to get other leaders on board? That was a long answer.
But a good one. I've got kind of a related question from Gabriella. Do you believe that customer segmentation is the best way to show stakeholders where the company is at and to trigger that necessary action? Or how can segmentation fit into that
Mhm.
strategy?
Yeah, it's a great one. I sometimes uh try to distinguish too when you're talking about segmentation or you're talking about personas, that can be a little different, but segmentation is a great way to do that if you have good ways to do that. The other thing we need to remember as customer experience leaders is we have to tell our customer story. And one of the best ways you can do that is developing a persona around your at-risk customer. The persona is more personalized. You can tell their story. You can talk about exactly what happens after they interact with your brand. Once you get people to really humanize the customer, that can make a difference because your leaders will internalize that better than just data. So when you segment, it's important. There are great tools out there for how to segment and everything else. But sometimes I've seen that be so objective and so data based that it doesn't really tell the customer story. So I like when we take those segments, we drill down, we create personas for the very customers that we're talking about. So if we're talking about the fact that, we know that customers drift after 2 years. Well, look at your journey and figure out what do those customers have in common? What are the things that we can know about them? And how can we help them achieve their goals in a better way? And so that's how I like to tell that story, but it can definitely help when you're looking at, uh, we have so much data now, and there are so many amazing people on teams who are good at slicing and dicing. And so this is a great question for your data or your analytics team. You know what? We realize that after 2 years, customers are leaving us. Can you figure out for me who are those customers? What is that segment? Once you get that information, that's when you can really translate that into telling the customer story. Very good question.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Gabriella. Thais has a question, well, kind of open ended. She says, this could be a suggestion for a Friday lecture, but Jeannie, if you have any insights you want to share now, I'd love to hear them as well. Any recommendations for CX metrics? And I know
Mm,
we've talked in the past a bit about which metrics kind of serve
mhm,
which goals, but especially within the context of understanding at risk customers and even trying to retain at-risk customers and things like that.
mhm.
Any recommendations for CX metrics?
Yeah, this is a big question because it really does depend on your goals and also what you have available to you. So the way I like to break this down is think about your goals. What are you trying to do? What metrics are you already tracking if you are? What tools do you have available to you? Is it just surveys? Do you have real time ways to capture information? Do you have analytics? All of those different things. And then you really want to look at which metric will serve your goals. So, for instance, if you're talking about loyalty in general or relationship management, I found that NPS can be very effective for that in many industries. It also depends on your industry and other things. You might want to use customer satisfaction at key transactional points throughout the journey. You might want to use customer effort score when it comes to things like a self-service, when customers are really looking for answers for themselves. Customer effort score can be a really good indicator for how is that working for them. So that's the type of thing you want to walk through. You want to really think about where is the best way to use these metrics, what are our goals, and then the other thing I like to stress here is don't track metrics if you're not going to do anything with them. Make sure you have a plan of action for what will you do with this information, because customers are giving you information, they're giving you feedback. That moment where we're collecting that feedback is still part of their customer journey and their customer experience. We sometimes talk about these things as if they're separate. They're really not. The customer has that moment where they're being asked for feedback. That is a moment along their journey. It can be disruptive. It can be exactly where they need it to be when they are having an issue. But then if they provide information about that issue and don't hear anything back, that's a negative touch point for them. So really think through, what are your goals? What metrics will best serve you? What tools do you have available? And then also, what are the ways that we can make this a positive part of the customer journey by knowing what we'll do with that feedback as we collect it? So, yeah, we could do a whole thing on that. So, good idea, Thais.
Yeah, that's a great question. Christopher's got a question that I love. It reminds me of a miracle on 34th Street
Oh,
when
boy.
Santa Claus says, the Santa at Macy's, I think it is, says, "We don't have this, but Gimbals does. You can go down the street and get it." So Christopher asks, should we ever think if a customer is at
Mhm,
risk, they might be better served by others, and
mhm.
let them go to receive a more suitable experience elsewhere? How do we
This
differentiate between an at-risk customer who we can save and one who's just not a fit, maybe?
this is such a great question, and for those of you who don't know Christopher, he, has created something called the Customer Experience World Games, which is really cool that you should look into, but, I believe yes. I believe yes, and I think one example that worked really well here in the United States is years ago, Progressive Insurance started saying, "You know what? Come get a quote on our site. We'll tell you what insurance would be for all of these different organizations, and you get to choose. It doesn't have to be Progressive. Sometimes we're going to be the cheapest, sometimes we're not." And I think that's a really good way to show customers that you actually care about them. And there are times where at risk customers are frustrated because the way that we serve customers is not meeting their needs. I think telling them, you know what, this isn't going to work because of XYZ. We're just not there yet, but this other group might. Or if they tell you they're going somewhere, sometimes it's best to just support them in that decision. We are taught as business people to hang on, right? We're taught to hang on to customers. We're taught to hang on to processes. We're taught to hang on to employees, to money, all of those things. And yet that doesn't really serve everybody. When I've had employees who have decided to go elsewhere, sometimes that can feel really bad, right? You're like, oh, this is terrible. Why aren't they staying? And I started realizing if I wish them well and I basically said, hey, I hope you find that happiness elsewhere, then they are going to do really well. They're going to do what they need to do, and then we'll figure things out too. So I think that the more we hang on, and this is a little like woo woo, but the more we hang on to things, that actually can create a lot of negativity. So sometimes the best thing we can do is say to the customer, you know, we are here to support you, and we know that that will meet your goals more. One of the things that I remember is my mom tells a story about when my sister, who's older than me, was uh, very young and needed a special kind of formula because she had an allergy. And my mom talks about how she went from store to store, and one store said, "Well, you should go to that pharmacy because they'll actually order it for you." And they did, and she was incredibly loyal to them. But she said it was all because that other store basically said, "You need to go to this other place." And she was so grateful. And so I think that when you think about those moments where people need something that we don't have for them, what better gift to give them in customer experience than to say, "This is where you can go. This is where you can make sure that you're going to get what you need." That's a gift that we can give customers. So yeah, it's sometimes a hard decision, but if we feel like we can't do it, then we shouldn't try that hard. I guess we shouldn't like try to hang on to them that hard. And it's a good recommendation for improvement that you can add to the journey, and then even reach out to them again and say, hey, you know what, we think we got this right now, will you come back to us? It's a great way to build a relationship.
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks, Christopher. Let's go back to another question that came in earlier this week. Keep your questions coming in if you've got them in the chat, though. So this question, they don't specify their industry, but they say, in our industry, we know our supply chain is messed up for a while. There's
Mm,
nothing we can do about it, but this does put customers at risk. What would you recommend we do in the immediate term?
mhm. Yeah, this is a really tough one, and it's very timely for the world we're living in right now. We are going to see supply chain disruptions for a while. And that's related to both materials and the environment and what's happening with weather, as well as labor shortages and things like that. There are a lot of disruptions happening in supply chains right now. The best thing I think we can do for customers is be incredibly proactive about both communication and visibility into what's going on, and what can we do to earn that loyalty longer term. Now, I talked about how travel has been really disruptive. There have been incredible delays in air travel. It's kind of a mess right now because any little hiccup causes a lot of ripple effect because we don't have enough people back. Travel picked up so quickly that a lot of the providers just weren't really prepared for what happened. And Delta recently emailed proactively all of their loyalty members and said, hey, we know it's still a tough time. Even though travel is open, it's still a tough time. We want you to know your miles are safe. So any miles you've earned, you have, and your status until January of 2023. I was so impressed with this because essentially what they're saying is, don't stress about this. Like, we know you're stressed about so many other things. Don't stress about this. And acknowledge that, you know what, it's not so fun right now as a passenger and that there are all of these disruptions. That's a great way to handle it. I think the other thing is to just be as proactive and transparent about what's actually happening behind the scenes. When we've talked about this I've talked about supply chain more in the last year and a half than I ever have in the past, because we have to be more transparent with our customers about it, especially in B2B. We have heard a lot of stories in our work around B2B disruptions because of supply chain disruptions. The problem is we have taught customer success managers and account managers and people who deal with the customers directly to sometimes put on a happy face and say everything's fine. You'll get that on Tuesday, when they know that we're not going to get it until Thursday, right? So we have to be really honest and say, you know what, customer, we are having this supply chain disruption. You may have heard about that barge that was stuck. Well, that had our product on it. And so we're doing everything we can for you. I will keep you posted as we develop different ways of getting things, or as we smooth out this disruption, whatever it is. So proactive communication, honesty, transparency, and visibility. The other thing, if we can, automation can help us here. Having an app, having some way for the customer to really look at, where are things and why am I not getting my product? Or where can I provide feedback that, you know what, you told me Tuesday, it's still not here. There are so many ways to address this, but we really have to make sure that we are being transparent and honest with our customers, because they will respect that more than hearing later about it, hearing why things won't work. Or the worst thing is when companies get defensive about this and say, hey, it's not our problem. We can't control our suppliers. Your customer does not want to hear that. They want to hear transparently what is happening and what are you doing as the person providing that experience, as the brand, I should say, providing that experience. What are you doing to make it a little easier, a little better? And that can be a lot of different things, especially in this moment in time. But, I just read that, I think it's Yelp, started having options in their descriptions about things like best times to come to a restaurant because of staffing. Uh, if you want to eat outside, if that's something that you want to do for your safety, how can we make sure that you do that? They're adding all sorts of things because they're thinking through, what are those disruptions that can happen that would prevent somebody from having a positive experience, and how can we be more transparent about it? So that's how I would think about it, just making sure that you're really being proactive and coaching your customer facing people who communicate on a regular basis, coaching them about how to do this well, and then making sure they have the right information. If they are telling people to, it will be shipped on Tuesday because that's how it's always been, and they don't have the right information, that puts everybody in a bad spot too. So transparency inside your organization and transparency outside your organization as well. And be nice to your suppliers.
Yeah, they could use that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think that's going to do it for our questions for this week. I want to thank everybody again who joined us and who commented with their questions or ideas. It's so great to have this community here and have everybody chiming in during these events. Jeannie, any final thoughts around today's topic?
Yeah, I would just say keep focused on what we can do right now. This is where we really are going to be leaders in our organizations. We need to make sure that we're bringing other leaders along with us to think about the customer, not just in numbers, not just in how things are going revenue wise, but as individuals who are dealing with all of these disruptions themselves, who have real emotions, real things at stake. We need to be the leaders to constantly tell their story. And part of that is staying connected to the daily lives of the customers that we serve. So I know this is a really challenging time for a lot of leaders out there. And I'm just so grateful that we have leaders like you who are out there really trying to serve customers in this way because as you know, the mission of my company is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And that's because we believe that makes a better world. And so by you being here, you're helping us live that mission. So thank you for that. And if you don't know where to reach us, there are several ways that you can get in touch. You can email us, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, don't forget yearofcx.com. We have some goodies coming up in the next few weeks. And then we will be wrapping that up this year in October. So make sure you're signing up for that now while everything is free and you get all of our new resources as they come out. As always, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing up for your customers, for your employees, for one another, and for our community. So we will see you here again on another Friday. If you have questions or topics that you'd like to suggest, don't be shy. Let us know what you want to hear about in our content as well. Thanks, everybody. Take care.